Hi, what's happening? Sandy James here. In this lesson series, I want to talk about something that scares a lot of guitar players, and it especially scared me when I was starting out, and it's called modes. Now, what is a mode? How do you use it? What context do you use it in? How do you use it to write music? All that kind of stuff. And weirdly enough, chances are you probably already know it, the same as what I did. The trouble is like the explanation is always a little bit kind of convoluted, where everybody's got their own idea of how you should approach modes, how you should understand it, or the terminology that's kind of banded around. For me personally, I'm going to take you through how I use modes and my perception of them. Now, it's not going to be really mega in depth, like theory wise. I mean, if any of you guys have seen my lessons before, you know that I try and keep things as kind of simple as possible, because playing guitar, it's not the easiest thing in the world, and you can technically kind of run away with yourself. But if you try and keep all your little concepts fairly simple, you can start to kind of build upon that. I mean, that's pretty much what I've been doing over the last sort of 25 years with my own playing. It's just taking little concepts and building on them, rather than just trying to have like loads of information thrown at me all at once. So the idea behind this lesson series is to kind of give you a very solid understanding of what a mode actually is, and the ones that are kind of most usable in a musical context. Now, we're talking kind of like in a rock context. We're not really talking about a jazz context. So things like the Locrian mode, for example, we're not really going to be looking at, because you have 7 modes. Only 6 of them do I ever really use, and a lot of other kind of rock players and metal players only really use those 6. Locrian is kind of one of those ones where if you were just going to jam over a Locrian chord progression, it would just sound a little bit weird. So we're going to learn the shape for Locrian, but we're not necessarily going to be looking at the application of that mode necessarily. So we're really going to be looking at the first 6 modes, and these are the ones that I feel like in a real world sense are the ones that are the most important ones to learn. And I've got examples in this lesson series as well of what each of those modes sounds like. But we're going to run through everything from the beginning and the ground up, which is obviously the best way to start when teaching this kind of thing. Now, I want to kind of simplify what modes actually is. In my mind, it's 3 things. It's a name, it's a shape, and it's a sound. And they're all attributed to the 7 positions of the 3-note per string major scale. Now, the order of those modes goes Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. So that's just 7 modes. And the cool thing about that is they're always in that order. They don't change. You don't suddenly start with Lydian and go to Aeolian and then sort of Ionian, Dorian, whatever. They always go in that order that I've outlined for you. And the reason it's important to kind of know that order is because of the shapes associated with those names. So on the guitar, whenever you play like a first position shape, it doesn't matter what key you're in, it'll always be followed by a second position shape, always followed by a third position shape, and then behind that first position shape, if you're kind of playing a first position shape up here, you've got shapes that go this way as well, so you'll be counting down instead of up. So this will be a 7th position, or first position, sorry, and then you'll have 7th position, 6th position, 5th position, so you can kind of go that way on the neck as well. So it's important to kind of realise that it was a kind of breakthrough moment for me when I just learned, or I could learn the 7 shapes of the major scale, and I knew that wherever I played a first position, there'd always be a second position above it, and there'd always be a 7th position below it, no matter what key you're in or what you're playing. So understanding how the neck of the guitar joins up in that capacity is really important, I think, and that's not just a standalone kind of concept when you're learning 3-note per string major scale positions. It's also something that's important when you're doing, I don't know, harmonic minor or pentatonic. I mean, I use a lot of pentatonics in my playing as well, and obviously we're going to be looking at some pentatonic shapes that work really well in the concepts that I'm going to be talking about. But it's always important to kind of know that if you play a first position pentatonic shape in whatever key, you're always going to have a second position above it and a 5th position below it. So there's only 5 positions of the pentatonic scale, but we're going to be looking predominantly at the 7 positions of the major scale, and we're going to be doing it in the key of G major. So hopefully you remember that I said about modes is basically a name, and a shape and then a sound. The way I look at it is the name and the shape go together. So if you think about the order of the list of modes that I said about, you know, Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian and Locrian, they're all in that order. I'll put them up on the screen so you can see it. And when you learn the major scale positions in a 3-note per string fashion, because if you want to shred or do anything fast, they're generally the better positions to learn than, say, the cage system shapes, which are all the traditional major scale shapes, which you would probably find more useful if you're playing things like jazz or country and stuff like that, because you play a lot in one position. With rock and metal, you're kind of always looking to expand out, so having the 3-note per string mentality is definitely better for that kind of fluid sound that most people want to get when they're playing, you know, shreddier kind of music. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with G major scale, obviously, but we're going to be starting with the first position, which is also known as Ionian. So at the list of modes that we've got, Ionian is at the top, so that is given the first position because it's number 1, and the shape of that is going to look like this. Okay, so hopefully you've noticed that the name and the shape go together. Ionian and then that shape, always paired together. It doesn't matter what key you're playing in or where you're playing it on the neck. That is a fundamental truth and it will never change. Okay, so moving on to the next name of the list, which is Dorian. That also has a name and a shape attached to it. So, I mean, forget the fact that both these that we're going to be looking at, or all of these actually, have a sound to it, because that's going to come later on, right? The only thing I want you to focus on is the name, because obviously we're going to be learning these in order, and I want you to learn the shape that is attached to that name. That's all we're doing right now. So the next position is going to be Dorian shape, and it looks like this. Okay, so it's a slightly different shape than the first position, but it encompasses all the same notes. You're just not starting from the first note, you're starting from the second note, but then it cycles round and you cover all the notes that you played before, just in a different position. So you start to kind of, even from playing 1 and 2 positions, that they interlock. So like interlocks with, so hopefully you can already see the relationship that, you know, the scales are locking together like that. So it's not a stretch to imagine that you can start in one position and then end up in another, because they're all interlocked. Or so this is how you start to move out of one particular position. Okay, so we've done Ionian and Dorian, which is position 1 and position 2. So we've both learned the name and the shape associated with that name. So now we're going to move on to the third in that list, which is Phrygian, and the shape for that looks like this. So every time you hear the word Phrygian, that is your first position shape that is attached to the Phrygian. That is the shape that you want to be playing. So moving on, we've done Ionian, Dorian and Phrygian, and we've learnt the shapes associated to those names. So the next one is going to be Lydian, which is 4 in the list, and the shape for that looks like this.